Goeiedag, good day, fellow South Africans, and I can't believe it, but there is so much material that you can have a rant about that I'm going to have another rant, okay? Now, the rant is to do with the subject of racism. And Gusher Brooks, who's the guy being interviewed by Enka in the video that I have attached, is talking about what's happening with racism in South Africa. And the whole focus is on the K word and whites being racist against blacks. And you'll see that for yourself. Now, the thing that I find extraordinary is that Brooks, in this interview, says we have to keep things in perspective. Yet when the interviewer asks him about politicians who are racist, and we know who they are, remember, this video was only shot less than a day after that bloody fool from the BFLF was calling for a war against the whites. Now, okay, let's keep this in perspective. And this is Brooks in action, as you'll see in the video attached. He keeps referring to the whites using the K word against the blacks, and about a woman who was incarcerated for using the K word on a one-to-one situation. I think it was with a policewoman, and she was thrown behind bars. When the interviewer asks him about politicians, and I guess she's referring specifically to the most recent example with this Anili guy, or whatever his surname is, it's crazy, the bloody fool, I call him, calling for a war against whites, this Brooks guy dodges the question. He just ignores it and says, oh, well, you know, we've got to keep things in perspective, keep things in perspective. Now, I have a K word for you, Mr. Brooks. Seeing you run the South African Human Rights Commission, or you're their communications person, and that K word is kill. What that BFLF bloody fool, goon, whatever you like to call him, is racist. And he was calling for the killing of white people. Now, what is more serious? Someone being called, some white person calling an African K, which I do not agree with at all, okay? Or a politician who leads a political party in South Africa calling for the killing of the white population. What is more damaging when it comes to race relations in South Africa? Why did you not address that subject when you had the opportunity on Enka? You ignored it. Okay, I'm going to say no more than just watch the video. You'll see for yourself what this idiot, yeah, you're a friggin' idiot, has to say. He's obviously very politically correct, and the whole bias is about white racism, when clearly the impact of what the black politicians are doing right now is just totally out of control. All right, guys, remember to subscribe to be kept informed, and have a great day. Bye for now.
20 years into democracy, racial inequality and discrimination have again topped the list of complaints received by the South African Human Rights Commission. This emerged during the release of the Commission's annual trend analysis report for 2016-17. But the good news is that there has been a slight decline in the number of race-related complaints. The SAHRC says many of the complaints it receives relate to the use of the K word, but it doesn't believe that South Africans are becoming more racist.
I don't think that we would deduce that South Africa was becoming more racist. I think that we've certainly pointed in the report to aspects such as social media, which allows people to publish and reach much wider audiences. And if what they're publishing is derogatory or racist or hate speech, then obviously more people see it.
We have in the studio SAHRC Communications Coordinator, Gashwal Brooks. Very good to have you with us.
Good evening,
Brooks. Were you surprised at the findings?
Weirdly enough, pleasantly, because we see a slight decrease in the number of matters coming through, complaints based on equality, specifically related to race. Because if you look at the 5-year, and this is the nice thing about this year's, or this financial year's trends analysis report, is that it gives us a picture of what happened over the last 5 financial years. Of course, we talk about the 2016-2017 financial year. That's the most up-to-date trends analysis report that we've released, and you can see that there's a definite uptick in terms of the complaints that we receive related to race or equality, specifically on the basis of race. And this time around, we had a slight drop. So yeah, it was a slight surprise.
And how do you measure it? Because are people becoming more confident in issuing these sort of complaints? So it could seem that it's going up when actually it's going down, if you know what I mean.
So, of course, that's definitely one of the issues that we've obviously also been closely monitoring, is the number of complaints that we are receiving. And what we see is that there has been a year-on-year increase as well in terms of the total number of complaints. So comparatively speaking, a slight decrease on complaints rather based on equality, specifically on the subcategory of race, as compared to a larger number of ever increasing complaints that we receive for human rights infringements. Definitely, I wouldn't say bode well, but it is an improvement of some sort.
And I think we've got to take whatever we can get in this country at the moment, right? Even those small changes. And the use of the K word, extraordinary that it's still being bandied about as frequently as it is.
No, indeed, it's very, very bothersome and very worrisome. And I think if there's one thing that we can take from the Vicky Momberg case is the fact that obviously it's problematic on multiple levels. The South African Human Rights Commission entered the fray for that particular case, at the Equality Court level.
Yes.
Of course, the police officer that was abused in that particular instance then took it further to the criminal court when she was charged with criminal injury, subsequently found guilty, and obviously was then sentenced to a custodial sentence for having done what she had done, or having said what she had said. But I mean, that shouldn't be the only basis on which people don't want to use the word, that they're fearing eventually finding themselves in prison or having an equality.
Probably a start there, right?
It is, perhaps, and then that is the point, isn't it, of any criminal sanction, is that
what you would rather be that it just never enters your mind.
Exactly, and that's where we have a deeper, broader discussion in terms of the role of society, including that of the South African Human Rights Commission. But I think that it is something that we can only deal with on a broader level, whether it be the media, whether it be a Chapter 9 institution like the South African Human Rights Commission, the Department of Basic Education, faith-based organizations, non-profit organizations, etc., and government itself. That's where the work really needs to happen in terms of smoothing over race relations in South Africa.
Yes, because it's got to start from the beginning, doesn't it? It's a real grassroots movement.
Exactly, and then that is fundamentally what the issue is here.
And do you feel that the government has got a hang of this? There is desire to put a stop to it and knows how it should be dealing with this?
I think the government is trying as hard as they possibly can, and I think that's one of the biggest mistakes we shouldn't make, is to be completely dependent on government. It's not a governmental issue, because it's pointless that government deals with human rights.
I think that is a fault of ours, isn't it? We always go, it's the government's fault. We don't know what to do. Tell us what to do.
Unfortunately, and that's how we give up a lot of our agency, and we deny the fact that it's up to us to ensure that when we're sitting at the dinner table with our children, or we're in the home, in whatever setting you can imagine, that we're not implanting those ideas into their heads, despite the fact that they go to a multiracial environment in the schools or whatever other environment they find themselves in. But if we are conducting ourselves in a racist manner in the home, even if we are, slipping in those little side comments about that particular group or this particular group, well, inevitably it's going to have an impact on them, and it's going to be normalized within society. And unfortunately, we have normalized a lot of our racism. We haven't abandoned it in 1994.
No. And is it the usual suspects? I mean, who's doing it?
It's across the board. Of course, the vast majority of people that find themselves on, being abused in this particular matter when it comes to race and racism, unfortunately happen to be black African people in the majority, but it's across the board. I mean, we have multiple
You can even hear it from our politicians, so that doesn't really help, does it?
Which is another concern. But, I mean, the fact of the matter is it comes across from all sides, and the law, as well as the South African Human Rights Commission, is not blind to the fact that we're going to assess who was the perpetrator of said abuse. We deal with all and sundry. So the fact of the matter is that if we receive a complaint, we don't ask whether is this a black African person that directed it at a white person, and therefore on that basis we're not going to act. We act in all instances. Valapi Kumalo is a good example that comes to mind, and many other examples. So all South Africans should steer clear of hate speech or any other conduct that amounts to racism.
I mean, we are seeing hate speech again with politicians sort of leading the hate speech. I mean, you say you're concerned about that. What is the conversation then in order to stop that from happening? How do you rein people in?
So, I mean, when it comes to problematic statements by politicians on all kinds of levels, I mean, that is something that we try to address. And I think that we also need to be wary of the fact that there are many options available to us, and that's what the Trends Analysis Report itself indicates, because there was a specific focus to show that the South African Human Rights Commission is not just a tool or an institution that uses the courts as a means to settle its cause. What happens is that we have alternative dispute mechanisms as well, or alternative dispute resolution mechanisms available to us. So, Jane, we can go all the way from having a word with a particular individual and saying that, listen, your conduct is problematic, and therefore you have to cease and desist, all the way through to obviously litigating on the particular matter, or initiating an investigation, assessing what they've said. And I think this is the other complexity all too often that people don't grasp, is that racism, when we talk about the K word, when we talk about, even if you look at the instance where we had that unfortunate incident with the green hoodie, the question was for people, some people thought it was new and rightly so, understood that it was innately racist from the onset, whereas other people still debated the merits around it. And I think that is the difficulty about race, and especially human rights violations based on race, especially when we start getting into the hate speech space. A lot of people don't quite grasp that their conduct and what they say is racist by nature.
And so, I mean, as you say, you see it on so many different levels. We're seeing it in schools that should know better, to politicians, to, man, woman on the street. What are your recommendations to put this kind of hate speech, this racism behind South Africans? I mean, do you have a game plan, a way forward?
Well, as I said, just to put it into perspective, so the South African Human Rights Commission has a footprint nationally. We have 10 offices in total, 9 provincial offices, as well as the head office here in Johannesburg or in Braamfontein. But, I mean, it's staffed by less than 200 people.
Wow.
That need to service 55 million people. So it's impossible for the South African Human Rights Commission to have this big plan that's going to end racism forever going forward. The fact of the matter is we need to be able to have open and honest conversations. And let's be honest, in the public discourse at the moment, we're having a lot of difficulties. So when we have conversations around notions such as white privilege, when we have conversations around the notion of who can be racist and who can't be racist, we're not having
quite sensitive, don't they?
Yeah. But we're not having open discussions about these things and trying to reach some form of consensus so that we can meet, or at least compromise and meet each other midway. So that I understand that, listen, I can't just go and put, coolest monkey in the jungle on a hoodie and assume that it's, funky and cool and that's going to sell hoodies. Yeah. That I can't just call people, dehumanizing names like monkey and baboon and that they're somehow acceptable. Or that after I've had a couple of, brandies, that I'm going to start making jokes about those folks over there. Yeah. And those are the things that we really need to start teasing out. Apart from that, we also need to get to a space where we don't try to just bury the past and say that it happened in the past and you guys need to get over it. Yeah. That we need to talk about that and sort of start healing those particular wounds. So as I said, it needs all those sectors of society, from faith-based organizations through to NGOs, to government, to us as Chapter 9 institutions. We definitely do carry a massive part in that.
And very quickly, so it's not just racism. I mean, what are the other abuses that say the top 5 that you are?
So offhand, I can't go immediately through the entire top 5, but I mean the one that stands out for me are the socio-economic rights that you had mentioned as well, Section 27 rights. So that is the right to health care, the right to food, water and sanitation. And those rights are very important as well, because obviously those are the rights that give you a healthy and happy environment to thrive in.
And what's holding that back?
I mean,
here, a bit of lack of money there.
Yeah, it's a broad, again, we find a broad spectrum. I mean, we had the oncology crisis in KwaZulu-Natal, where we had a serious problem with people accessing cancer treatment, all the way through to individual cases where we've had deaths of children and babies in hospitals because of lack of timely treatment, maybe while the mum is in labor, all the way through to a lack of proper health care. For whatever reason, missing medication, lack of staff. Those are some of the issues, of course, at the moment, and it doesn't relate. It's obviously not reflected in this trends analysis report, but a typical example is what we have in the Vaal, where I'm originally from myself, where we have litres upon litres of raw sewage spilling into the Vaal River, and then that in turn becomes people's drinking water. And we can only imagine what are the health risks that are then attached to that. So those are typically the types of issues that we're looking at within that particular space when we talk about socio-economic rights.
It's going to keep you busy. I know you've been busy today, and you're going to be busy for the rest of the night. Dr. Brooks, thank you very much. Thank you.